Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. We begin today in Sudan, where after 10 days of growing condemnation, the country's military rulers say they regret that some mistakes happened during the operation to clear the protest sit-in. However, the military council will not allow an independent international investigation. Instead, the regime says it will announce the results of its own probe on Saturday and that it has already arrested some officers. This comes as the military announces that it has thwarted several coup attempts. The council itself took power in a coup on April 11 when military officials ousted and detained former President Omar al-Bashir after months of protest against his 30-year rule. Meanwhile, Sudan's state persecutors have charged ousted President Omar al-Bashir with corruption. The 75-year-old was ousted in a coup after nearly 30 years in power at the beginning of April, following mass protests and a sit-in at the military headquarters. He has since been detained at Kobar Maximum Security Prison in the capital, Khartoum. He is wanted by the International Criminal Court, accused of organizing war crimes and crimes against humanity in Sudan's Darfur region, which he denies. Let's get more on this story from the VOA's Naba Mohidin, who joins us from Khartoum. Hello, Naba. Thank you for joining us on Network Africa. So how are the Sudanese people reacting to the news that the state persecutor is charging Omar al-Bashir with corruption?
In the current time, Sudanese protesters are not reacting to any news coming from official personnel or from any governmental media. Regarding the news about the ousted President Omar al-Bashir charged of corruption, activists and protesters think this news is just for consumption from TMC, as events for them are bigger than prosecutors renewing charges to al-Bashir. Also, corruption charge is not new charge for the former President al-Bashir, who's been charged earlier with money laundering and illegal trading with foreign currency. So protesters' reaction is not big to this news.
Well, the military has expressed regrets for some mistakes that it made during the operation.
No announcement made.
Well, yeah, to clear the protest sit-in in Khartoum, and has promised to punish those responsible for the violence. But Naba, how credible is this statement from the military?
No announcement made yet, but TMC said yesterday that the negotiations are running through regional and international mediations, like Ethiopian Prime Minister mediation delegation and also US. TMC also said that the agreement right now reached a percentage of 80%, not 95% as opposition leaders said. And it's expected to announce the civilian military government as soon as the mediation delegations make them come into one page, especially after both sides has shown an appreciation of mediation efforts made by US and by Ethiopian Prime Minister. Protest leaders have suspended civil disobedience and TMC has released the political prisoners. So it depends on the mediation and both sides' willingness to go forward and to solve the political issue.
Now, what is the status of the negotiations between the military and the opposition on the transition to civilian rule at the moment?
Yes, TMC has stressed out regression and promised to punish those responsible for the violence, as they claimed earlier that all forces had agreed not to kill anyone. This statement, in my opinion, is not very credible, as TMC has refused an international investigation on the violent events which opposition leaders demanded and insisted on. I think TMC is just under huge regional and international pressure to have an agreement with the protest leaders and to go forward without neglecting bringing justice to the protesters who were killed and injured. So I think they might do anything to defuse the streets. It has indications on TMC forming a committee and claim to start investigations after the site of the sit-in outside army headquarters was totally burned and roofs were removed. Another indicator also is their rejection of any international investigation they earlier stressed out.
All right, VOA's Naba Mahidan speaking to us there from Khartoum. Now, still on the crisis in Sudan, representatives from the United Nations, EU, and members of the UN Security Council have joined the African Union's effort to push Sudan's Transitional Military Council and opposition towards a transition to democracy. While speaking to reporters in Khartoum, African Union Special Envoy Mohamed Al-Hassan says the body was set up to support efforts to resume talks that collapsed after the violent crackdown of a protest sit-in on June the 3rd. Talks between the military and the opposition were deadlocked before the crackdown, which led to at least 118 deaths. But that's according to opposition-linked medics. The government has confirmed 61 deaths, including 3 security personnel. Al-Hassan says he also expects an investigation into the crackdown. The bloodshed has drawn expressions of concern from world powers, including the United States, which imposed sanctions on Sudan under Bashir over its alleged support for militant groups and the civil war in Darfur. African Affairs analyst Achike Chude joins us live in the studio to discuss more on this. Thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you.
So are you happy with the way the international community, especially the African Union, is reacting to this crisis?
I guess so. I guess so. I think they have tried to be proactive with over this crisis right from the time it started, and I think they made their position known. They did not prevaricate on the fact that they wanted the civilian. They wanted the civilian, representative, a civilian face when it comes to, the government of Sudan, even if it's on a transitional level. They made that very clear to the military junta that they were not in support of their staying in power and consolidating on power. And they urged them right from the beginning to ensure that the discussions with the people would bear fruit. Hopefully, in terms of the people taking over, governance of Sudan and leading it through a, transition period to election. They have made it clear. And of course, after this, massacre, they have also voted against them. In support of suspending Sudan from the AU. So I think when it comes to the African Union, they have done relatively well, and of course, other countries within the region. Within Africa, the Ethiopian president has also been involved in the process for peace. Yeah.
Let's talk about foreign intervention, though. While expressing regret for the violence that happened in the crackdown on June the 3rd, the Military Council also said it has avoided several coup attempts. Could this be due to outside interference from countries who have a stake in what's going on in Sudan?
Oh, of course, there are various, of course, first of all, I think there are forces outside that are obviously involved in what is happening in Sudan. Within the council itself, the junta, there is, dissension right from the very beginning of the crisis. And of course, Bashir, the former president, is also responsible for that, because in order to stave off possible coup plots against him, he divided critical elements of the country's security. And pitted one against the other. And so you have the regular military that's involved in this. You have the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, which is an offshoot of the Janjaweed militia. In fact, it is that group that is responsible, that's said to be responsible for the massacre that took place, not the army. And then you also have the intelligence forces. It was this intelligence unit that al-Bashir wanted to fire while he was still, president, wanted to, gave order to shoot at the civilian populace, but the regular army prevented that from happening at the initial stage. And I think what is happening is that the international community is feeding off the confusion that is going on among these key elements of the Sudan security forces. You have Saudi Arabia on one side that is supporting the RSF, like I said, an offshoot of the Janjaweed militia, because they have been supplying, troops, large troops, in the endless war, the pointless war that is going on in Yemen. So there's that, perspective. Then you have Egypt that is in support of the regular army. Of course, they've shown a lot of disdain for the, Islamic militia, which is represented by the RSF. And of course, they are also having their own problem with the Islamic militia in Egypt. So you have all of that support. And I think now you also have the United States that has Egypt and Saudi Arabia as an ally in that, their parts of the country. And so I think what they are now trying to do is to see whether there is a way the United States can play a more positive role to get these two key allies of theirs, who are also, when it comes to Sudan, have taken different, approaches to the crisis in Sudan, to see whether they can get them to work together to ensure stability within Sudan. Because if that does not happen, the possibility of, of war breaking out between all sides is very high.
Yeah. Achike Chude, so much to say. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Network Africa. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you.